Hey, it's Ramsey Dewey over here in Shanghai, China. Welcome to another edition of Q&A with the Coach. Today we have a question from our friend Sebastian. Sebastian is new to teaching martial arts, and he says he wants to know how many techniques he should teach in one session. Actually, he says, I'm not sure how many techniques I should teach in one session. And if that's the case, I would say focus on one, at least for right now. But let's read the rest of the question. He says, on the one hand, it takes time to learn the techniques. On the other hand, I want my students to get the most out of class. All right, do you want your students to get the most trivial information, or do you want them to be able to leave that class with a usable skill set? Because those are different things. On with the question. He says, my philosophy is that strength and conditioning should be mostly done on your own time. Okay, that's fine. But I'm not sure how much that should be projected on technique drills. Well, technique drills and strength and conditioning are radically different things. Unless your technique drills are, say, deadlift technique, pull-up technique, squatting technique, burpee technique, something like that. That's a different thing, man. So strength and conditioning should not be confused with technique and sparring. Anyway, he goes on to say, so in short, let's say you have 2 hours for a class. How many techniques would you teach, and how much time do you dedicate to repeat techniques from the last session? Okay. All right, Sebastian, I see where you're coming from. And I'm going to tell you a story before we get into the details of this question. When I opened up my first gym back in the United States, I invited my 2 most influential coaches, the 2 men that I respect in the martial arts more than anything else, Shane Brenner and Mark Brewer, to come and teach a seminar for my students. And so they did. And these 2 brilliant minds in grappling and mixed martial arts, they got together and they put on a masterwork class on one single technique, which was the get-up. In other words, when somebody puts you on the ground against your will and fights and works to keep you on the ground against your will, how do you get back up on your feet? Now that's one technique, but it's a lot of different scenarios. And when I first heard we're going to do get-ups for the next 2 hours, my heart sunk a little. I thought, oh, but I want to learn some fancy spinning doohickeys that look cool. When what we really needed to focus on was the fundamentals of winning fights. And position wins fights. And if you are on your back against your will, you are not winning the fight. If you do not have the power or the ability to improve your position from there, then you're not winning the fight, and you're not going to. So the brilliance of that seminar, focusing on that one thing, that one nitty-gritty, boring thing, the technical get-up. Something that anybody in a jiu-jitsu class would probably think, yawn, I know that. Sure, you know it up here. But have you ever had, say, let's say a Division I wrestler on top of you, keeping you down on the floor, dropping elbows on your face? What you know up here doesn't matter anymore. It's what you know in your body, it's what you can do that matters at that point. So going back to the question, how many techniques should you teach? Now, a good gold standard is 1. But at the same time, you introduced yourself as a coach, not as a teacher, but as a coach. And I'm not going to tell you you're wrong in that assessment. You introduced yourself as a coach, so let's be a coach here. What is the difference between a coach and a teacher? Because those are different jobs. A teacher, a martial arts teacher, teaches techniques. Right? That's what you're doing, so you can be a teacher and a coach. So let's be both right here. Because that's the role that you have given yourself. You introduced yourself to me as a coach, so let's coach, not just teach. A teacher teaches techniques. to people who don't know the technique. So here's how to do a technical get-up. Here's how to throw a punch. Here's how to do a certain kick. Here's how to do a certain takedown or sweep or submission, etc. A coach is different. Imagine for a moment, you are coaching the world's greatest fighters. Imagine you're coaching a who's who list of UFC champions. Are you teaching them anything? You're not teaching them how to throw punches and how to throw kicks and how to do takedowns. They know all that stuff. In fact, they may know it better than you do. So what's the value of a coach? A coach facilitates a process. Facilitate, that means to make easier. A coach facilitates the process. And what is the process that a fighter, a champion fighter, wants to facilitate? Winning a fight. And maybe that's the goal of your students. Maybe that's your goal. Maybe you didn't mention what type of martial art it is. It could be a traditional martial art where the goal is a little bit different. Maybe it is to uphold a tradition. Maybe it is to enact self-improvement of some way. And that's okay. That's fine. Those are all noble, worthy goals. Okay? And as a coach, your job is to facilitate that process. Not simply to teach a technique, right? So let's pick one technique. Again, I don't know what sport or martial art you're coaching. Let's assume it's jiu-jitsu. Okay, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I know a lot of my viewers are Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioners, so we'll be on the same page linguistically. Okay, what's a common situation in a fight? A jiu-jitsu match or an MMA fight. One fighter gets taken down, and the top guy gets a full mount position. That means he's sitting on top of you. He is straddling you in a position where he has all the advantages and you have no advantages whatsoever. So you have to improve your position. Before you can think about getting up, before you can think about fighting back, before you can think about submissions or sweeps or any of that, you have to improve your position from full mount. So, you're going to teach a mount escape to these new white belts who want to learn jiu-jitsu. You want to teach a technique that will take them from the bottom, pinned position, to the top, or to at least a neutral position, where they're able to fight back intelligently. Now, how many mount escapes are there? Well, there are a bunch. We can narrow them down into like 3 basic categories. Mount escapes involving bridging and rolling, mount escapes involving escaping to half guard and trapping one leg, mount escapes involving hip escaping. And we can subdivide that into smaller categories, right? But let's focus on one. So let's imagine these are new students. You mentioned you're a new coach, so you probably have some new students. I'm guessing you're probably not teaching a who's who list of the greatest UFC fighters on the planet right now. We're working our way up, baby steps, right? So I'm assuming you have new students. Okay. Are we going to teach these brand new students every single mount escape to make them feel like, oh, I got the most bang for my buck out of that lesson? I've tried teaching lessons like that, where I'm like, okay, there are 3 basic types of mount escapes, and there are like 15 different variations of this and this and this, and other variations of that and that, right? And it confuses people, especially new students. It confuses people. You got to build the foundation before you can build the house on top of it. And I remember as a young, newer coach, I would often have newer students come up to me after class and say, hey, I really like your class, but, and after the but would come the constructive criticism, there's just too much information. Could you simplify? And it was at that point I started to realize the difference between a teacher and a coach. A teacher, and also a professor. A professor professes. I'm not talking about a Brazilian jiu-jitsu professor in Portuguese meaning teacher. I'm talking about, say, a university professor. They profess. You go in, you sit down for an hour-long lecture, and they tell you a million different things. They give you a textbook full of information. You don't know how much of it, if any, will be on the test. And there's a lot of guesswork in that process. How much will you may or may not retain, who knows? But a coach, as I said before, facilitates a process. Remember, facilitate means to make easier. Comes from the Latin word for easier. How do you say that in Latin? In Spanish, it's fácil. Fácil. Man, I can't believe I got the accent wrong on that. Anyway, it means to make easier, literally. So your job is to make the process easier for your students. One of my more popular videos recently was about the turning back kick. And the turning back kick, it's nothing new. People have been doing turning back kicks forever. There are a million videos on YouTube right now, excellent videos about the turning back kick. And I could point out a few excellent examples, like the Ginger Ninja Trickster. The GNT has this great video about how to do the turning back kick, or the spinning back kick, whatever you want to call it. And he tells you exactly where to put the parts of your body to make that technique happen, right? And Quan Kicker has an excellent video about the turning back kick and how to put maximum power and explosion into that move and just knock people across the ring in spite of being a smaller guy using that technique. It's excellent. And I made my own, and I decided to put my own spin on it and simplify it. And I made this technique video under the assumption that the people watching already know the spinning back kick. Right? They know it, or at least they've seen it. They have a succursal understanding of what the spinning back kick is. They know how to turn around, lift up a leg, and project it in a straight line. So the whole point of that video was to facilitate the process of putting yourself into the correct position, the right footwork. Basically, how to land the dang thing. Not how to put your hands and feet in the right place, not to apply maximum power, but how to land the thing in the first place. And that can be a very, very complex topic. Footwork can be, and often is, made into an extremely overcomplicated process. So we have to streamline that, bring it down to the lowest common denominator. What does footwork mean? What is that overcomplicated process at its essence? Footwork is putting your feet in the place they need to be relative to your opponent's feet. If we were to take a snapshot of a certain frame in time, in order to make a technique work. And so at its core, that technique video is really just put your feet here, and then you can land that kick. That simple. And as a result, I got hundreds of positive comments saying, I am a 3rd degree, 4th degree, 5th degree, 6th degree Taekwondo black belt, and this video opened up my eyes about the turning back kick and made me realize all these things I'd never even thought about before. Bear in mind, high-level Taekwondo black belts are writing these messages to me, saying, this video helped a lot. It made the process easier. You facilitated the process. These are guys who know how to do this kick. These are guys who can smash boards and have competed in tournaments and won medals and all this stuff doing these kicks. And I didn't teach them to do it. I facilitated the process. So that's an example of coaching right there. Not trying to pat myself on the back saying I didn't think it was the greatest video ever, but apparently some people got a great deal out of it. Okay, so the point of that story is that as a coach, you can take something simple, something really, really simple, and you can make it simpler to the point where even a high-level professional, a high-level champion, a high-level practitioner would be like, whoa, you have opened up my eyes. And it's not a matter of doing more. Now, you can do more. For example, I attended a great Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu class 2 days ago, and there was a 2nd degree black belt teaching, and he taught this great lesson on the De La Riva guard. And in that lesson, he essentially taught 4 techniques, but they were all complementary techniques, all techniques contingent on a basic solid foundation. And that is one way I like to teach, where it all goes back to this base movement. And if you branch out into 3, 4, whatever techniques, they all go back to that base movement. So that if you were repping it out, for example, you might get a couple dozen reps of movement A, a couple dozen reps of movement B, a couple dozen reps of movement C, but you'll get hundreds of reps of that base movement. And so you'll leave, maybe not remembering technique A, B, and C and all the details of those, probably not being able to do those in a fight, but that base movement upon which they are contingent, you will absolutely remember that. You'll be able to take that with you. And when you come back the next time, you asked about repeating the technique again the next day. And that's important. Sometimes it bores people, but it's important. When you repeat it again the next day, you can build on it further. And you can take that base movement again and focus on something else. It's important for students to realize that to win fights, to be good at martial arts, you don't have to know every single technique. You don't have to master every single little thing. You do have to master those base movements, though. That's why basics win fights, right? Let's go back to the get-up, the technical get-up, and some things I learned from that seminar with my old coaches, Mark Brewer and Shane Brenner. Awesome, awesome guys. Love those guys to death. Attempting a get-up creates opportunities. A failed get-up creates opportunities. Why? Because it makes space. And when you have space, you have options to do other things. Now, we could make a lesson on something as simple as a technical get-up, as simple as just repping out the base movement against different types of resistance. Or we could make it as complicated as you attempt this get-up, your opponent drives forward, attempting to bring you back down, which facilitates a certain sweep, or you attempt the sweep and then they move this way and that facilitates a submission. They attempt to defend this, and we can turn it into a big flow chart if you want. But it's all contingent on understanding the basics. So right now, as a beginning coach, make sure to focus on the basics. Master the basics. Look at any complex technique. Let's go back to Taekwondo for a minute. Taekwondo has how many basic techniques? 7 basic kicks. We've got a round kick, we've got a front kick, we've got an axe kick, we've got a hook kick, an arc kick, a side kick, a back kick, right? And there are many other kicks in Taekwondo, but they're all contingent on those base movements. Upon those base movements, we add level changes, we add turns, we add spins, we add jumps, we add leaps. We add other movement qualities to change the movement, or we use those base movements in combination with each other or in combination with different footwork positions. And by doing so, we create opportunities for different techniques, if you will. I'm putting that in air quotes because they're the same 7 base techniques, but from an outside perspective, they can look really, really fancy. Look at really any fancy technique. An Imanari roll, for example. If you've never seen an Imanari roll, or you don't know how to do an Imanari roll, and you look at it, you look at this. This is a jiu-jitsu technique. A guy from a standing position shoots down, rolls onto his back, grabs the other guy's leg, spins around, weaves his legs through, does this little half twist. They end up on the ground in this kind of acrobatic looking motion, and then you end up in a heel hook position. It's a great move, and it's a lot simpler than it looks. Strip that down to the base movements. What is it? It's an inversion, And it's half of a Granby roll, basically. So, if you're training basic tumbling every single day, like you should in a grappling class, if you're doing basic rolls, shoulder rolls, forward shoulder rolls, back lateral rolls, Granby rolls, inversions, cartwheels, roundoffs, all that basic stuff, do that at the beginning of your class, do that at the end of your class. Doing something like an Imanari roll, learning that, suddenly it's not so complicated anymore. And look at Taekwondo. What's a fancy Taekwondo technique? Okay, the tornado kick, the 360 jumping, spinning roundhouse kick. If you don't know how to do that, you might think, whoa, that's a super fancy move. But what is it really? It's a round kick, one of the 7 basic Taekwondo kicks. But what do? You add a spin and an aerial moment. It's a weight change from one foot to the other. Boom, boom, right? If you strip that down to the most basic movements, it's a leap, that's a transfer of weight from one foot to the other, while throwing a kick, and then turning around in a circle. These are simple things, but when we see them all at once, it seems overly complicated. That's why it's so incredibly important to focus on base movements. Now, people can get bored with base movements if they don't know what they're for. And this is a problem that a lot of traditional martial arts classes run into, where they will teach forms, and the forms are filled with these beautiful base movements, but they're not often explained. And so the students could spend years doing the forms, wondering, well, what the heck are these movements even for? And never getting the answer to that question. So you have to, I should say, you probably should, give your students some meat to put on that skeleton that they're building. The foundation being the skeleton, the base movements being the skeleton, and the application thereof being the muscle, the meat, the stuff that makes that skeleton move. Simplify when you must. Facilitate always. Thanks for watching. Now get out there and train.